Robert Hanson's, you look at the other significant, John Walker, they're selling out the country for money. That tends to still be probably the primary problem that we have. Even under subtleties where a foreign intelligence service can step in and buy the technology or try to buy the company that's producing the technology under the guise that you simply acquire it and you're from a quasi-friendly country and you want to just buy the whole company itself. So money tends to be a very, very important lure, and just some people are more vulnerable than others. What the internet has done, because of the availability of information on everybody, makes it easier for a foreign intelligence service to identify individuals who have outstanding debts and financial problems and perhaps other problems that may leave them open to recruitment. So the internet has in many ways made the art of recruitment more effective these days. Bob, I know Bob has thoughts on this as well.
I would like to add to the family, to the nest of mice, some rats. And I think we have seen, particularly in maybe the last 30 years, the evolution of some of these other motivations, and I use the acronym RATS to stand for revenge, affinity, theology, and security. And we've seen a significant number of cases where people have become spies or turned to spying as a revenge against either the institution or individuals that they perceive have mistreated them. We also see significant affinity. That is, people who get into the spy business because of family relationships. The John Walker case is one. Actually, the Culper spy ring going back is another where the relationships were very significant. The Rosenbergs became a family spy operation, motivated partially by affinity, I would argue. Then the theology factor has been significant in what we have seen as in terms of the recruitment, particularly for some of the radical terrorist kinds of operations. They appeal to the theology involved. And finally, there are spies that are interested in security, either for themselves or their family. These are most often folks, individuals who come from places where either political or physical security is always an issue, is not assured. And so when an intelligence organization can offer a sense of security for the individual or for their families, that becomes a very attractive motivator.
That's very interesting when you mention some of the reasons, and that a person who sees himself as a failure would want to become a spy. That profile matches up closely to would-be political assassins, people who are failed upstarts in life and want to make a name for themselves, and they figure the fastest way to do that is to try to kill a senator or president. At least from profiles I've read of would-be assassins, they sound very similar to what you described as a potential spy. So to, I think, wrap up a lot of these things, I have a two-parter final question. In light of the not so glamorous profile of these spies that you mentioned, what is it about spy stories that continue to capture our imagination? And will spycraft remain how it has been, or do you think it's going to change in the digital era?
Well, I'll take the first stab at it. Spies have been a part of our history since recorded time. Every government throughout history has had some intelligence component which enabled to give their military and political leaders information that could help keep the country safe. It's 132 references in the New Testament to espionage and spies. So it's part of our culture and our history. I believe it will continue to be, and perhaps the stakes will raise even more. It's the public fascination with it that I believe became prominent after wars. After the Rev War, there were a number of writings of individuals that gave their exploits. After the Civil War, Pauline Cushman and others gave somewhat embellished stories over their successes and the daring adventures they were in. But when we get into World War II and the Cold War, we find far more accurate, detailed recountings of operations and motivations and the importance. And we see that the work, for example, on the Enigma and stealing the Enigma secrets shortened the war arguably as much, World War II, as much as 2 years. You can talk about spies, individual spies in the early 60s during the standoff between Russia and China in the Cuba crisis. The role of Oleg Penkovsky, arguably the man who saved the world from a nuclear war at that point. It's far easier to pinpoint specific actions and correlate them with success and how they've changed history. So it's now inculcated into our society so much that if anything, we think everyone's a spy. But you counterbalance that with the fact that as we now welcome into our country immigrants from many countries that have historically been adversarial, there are millions of Russians living in the U.S. We welcome millions of Chinese into the country, where we know that China is the number one strategic threat, espionage-wise, to the United States, and Russia is certainly the number one technical threat to the U.S. We're welcoming individuals, most of whom come here peacefully and when they want to become citizens, but a large number are operating undercover. And of course, that was the premise of the highly successful series on FX, The Americans, which was based on the real case of ghost stories, which of course, great portions of it happened significantly in New York City with Anna Chapman and her cohorts. So it's going to continue.
Scott, I would add that whether a spy is seen as an attractive personality or character frequently depends on whether that person is spying for you or against you. And I don't draw a moral equivalent between individuals who spy for countries that respect human dignity and human rights and democratic processes. I do not make a moral equivalent to those who spy for countries who degrade people, who essentially are prison states, who are dictatorships, and those kinds of political systems. The point that I think that I would make, though, is that the spy, regardless of their motivation, is engaged in a second life that almost universally is high stress, high adrenaline, high excitement. And I think, to respond to your initial question, that's one of the continuing attractions. I can say, as an intelligence officer for the years that I worked, that's an exciting career. It's a fascinating career. It's a career that you wake up every morning and say, well, I may not make a difference today, but again, I've got a good chance. I've got a chance of doing so. And I think probably the spy has, in that sense, some of the same emotional, intellectual investment in doing the job as the case officer, as the intelligence officer has. So yeah, it's exciting business. No wonder it's portrayed excitingly.
All right. Well, it's something that's been with us across history. And for listeners out there who are considering getting into espionage, these are fair warnings about some of the issues that you'll be dealing with. Well, the book is Spy Sites of New York City, a guide to the region's secret history, and listeners can learn a lot more about that if they check that book out. Bob and Keith, thanks for joining us.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so that is all for today. That's today's episode. Thank you for joining me. First off, I want to give a shout out to the Spy Masters for the Knowlton's Rangers. Vic Austin, Chris, Rob Matlock, Alan Baker, Beverly Engel, Jake Harrington, Todd Warren, William Ivey, Joyce Normant, Tyler from Colorado, Josh Reddick, Daniel Lawson, Marlene, Michael, Tim Clark, David Powell, Moondoggy from Ohio, Melissa, Christopher Maine, Carl from Norway, Tom from Ohio, Jennifer French Lee, and Baron Fraser. I'll explain what that is in a second. If you like the show and want to help it grow, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, like and subscribe to the show on the podcast player of your choice. This helps spread the word about the show. 2, join our Facebook group. Here we can keep the discussion going about new episodes, and you can talk about what you like and didn't like. And you can find this group if you just search for History Unplugged on Facebook. 3, we have an online store with t-shirts, phone covers, and other accessories featuring awesomely bad history puns that were crowdsourced by you, the audience. And you can find that if you go to public.com and look for History Unplugged, or you just go to historyonthenet.com and look for our store there. 4, and this is really the best way to dive deep with History Unplugged, and that's to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you know your American history, you know the Knowlton's Rangers were an elite spy and reconnaissance group in the American Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the membership program of History Unplugged. You can join at 3 levels. If you join at the level of Scout, you can hear all the episodes of History Unplugged completely ad-free and get early access to new episodes, at least a week early. If you join at the Intelligence Officer level, you get special bonus episodes, like a 10-part series on the World War II hero Audie Murphy, a multi-part series called Ottoman Lives about different people in the Ottoman Empire, and a series called Rendezvous with Death that looks at biographical profiles of Americans who went to fight in World War I before America entered the war. The last level is Spy Master, where you get all that stuff, but you also get 3 hardcover history books, Forging a President, How the Wild West Created Teddy Roosevelt, Race to the Top of the World, Richard Byrd and the First Flight to the North Pole, and The Last Fighter Pilot, the true story of the final combat mission of World War II. Another bonus is you can choose a history topic for me to focus on for an entire episode that can go up to an hour, and I'll answer whatever question you have for me, and you get a shout out at the end of each episode. If you want to learn how to become a member of the Knowlton's Rangers, go to patreon.com/unplugged. That's patreon.com/unplugged. All right, well, that is all for my spiel. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast, from ancient Greece to the Cold War and everything else in between. See you next time.